Good morning, everyone. Today we will be tackling an interesting literature. But before that, I want you to observe on this animated picture. So, do you know this kind of people? How about their clothing? So, I want you to pause this video and try to write your opinion on any scratch paper that you have. Okay, great job. Yes, you are correct. They are Arab people. Today we will be learning on the Arabic literature. And I am Butch G. Tatay, and I will be discussing to you the geographical features, background of the place, culture and tradition, and the way of life, and some facts that we should know about the Arab. So let us start from the geography of the Arab world. So the Arabian Peninsula has served as both a land bridge and a center for indigenous cultural development for hundreds of thousands of years. So its central location with Africa to the west and Asia to the east so gave it a critical role in human history that can best be absorbed by a closer look at its geography. So, to elucidate the human history of the Arabian Peninsula, it is therefore beneficial to understand the most prominent features of the region. Okay? So, the Arabian Desert may be divided into three key parts. So, these are the Arab Desert. So, one of its geographical features, the An-Nafud, Adana, and Rub al-Khali. So, another one is the mountains and plateaus. The Sarawat is the largest mountain range in the Arabian Peninsula, stretching from the border between Jordan and Saudi Arabia, down to the Gulf of Aden in Yemen, so along the western edge of the Arabian Peninsula. So they also have the plains. So one of it is the Barayar Rakba. It is a great sand plain that emerges south of the Harat Kejb. It consists of an extremely flat region with little vegetation and a low population. So it is directly east of the cities of Jeddah and Makkah and south of Medina. So these are the coast in Arab world. So the vast Arabian Desert, so this institute of fresh water, is ironically nearly surrounded by seas. So these include the Red Sea, Gulf of Aden, Arabian Sea, Gulf of Oman, and Arabian Gulf. So in general, the climate is extremely hot and arid, although there are exceptions. Higher elevations are made temperate by their altitude, and the Arabian Sea coastline can receive surprisingly cool, humid breezes in the summer due to the cold upwelling offshore. So the peninsula has no thick forests. Okay. So the Arabian Peninsula is a desert environment surrounded by saltwater bodies. So the Persian Gulf, the Arabian Sea, and the Red Sea border the peninsula on the three sides. Arid type B climates dominate the region. Saudi Arabia only receives an average of 4 inches of precipitation per year. Then Arab identity. So Arab identity is defined independently of religious identity and predates the spread of Islam and before spread of Judaism and Christianity. The Arabs are first mentioned in the mid-19th century BSE as people living in the eastern in the southern Syria and the north of the Arabian Peninsula. So, Arab is the people, while Arabic is a Semitic language that first emerged in the 1st to 4th centuries. It is the lingua franca of the Arab world and the liturgical language of Islam. So it is named after the Arabs, a term initially used to describe peoples living in the Arabian Peninsula. So these are the countries in the Arab world or Arab Peninsula. So Algeria, Bahrain, Comoros, Djibouti, Egypt, Iraq, Jordan, Kuwait, Lebanon, Libya, Mauritania, Morocco, Oman, Palestine, Qatar, Saudi Arabia, Somalia, Sudan, Syria, Tunisia, UAE, and Yemen. Okay, so that's it. The early Arabs of the Arabian Peninsula were predominantly nomadic pastoralists who herded their sheep, goats, and camels through the harsh desert environment. So we have the Islam, of course. So we talk about the Islam, which developed in the West Central Arabian Peninsula in the early 7th century CE, was the religious force that united the desert substances, nomads, and the Bedouins with the town dwellers of the oasis. So within a century, Islam had spread throughout most of the present day. So in Arabic-speaking world and beyond, from Central Asia to the Iberian Peninsula. So Arabic, or the language of the Islamic sacred scripture also, which is the Quran. So what was adopted throughout much of the Middle East and North Africa as a result of the rapidly established supremacy of Islam in those regions. So these are things that we should know about the Arabic or the Arab. So native to countries of the Arab League, minorities in neighboring countries and some parts of Asia, Africa, Europe. And then ethnicity. So we have the Arabs and the original peoples of the Middle East and the North Africa as a result of language shift. And we have the native speakers. Native speakers, or the 350 million, all varieties. So 270 million second language speakers of modern standard Arabic. And then we have the language family: Afro-Asiatic, Semitic, West Semitic, Central Semitic, and then North Arabian Arabic. So early form, it is the Proto-Arabic, the Old Arabic, and Old Hijazi. And then Classical Arabic. Then we have the standard forms. So in standard forms, we have the modern standard Arabic. Yes. And then the dialects: Western, which is the Maghribi; Northern, Egyptian; Mesopotamian, Levantine; and Southern, Peninsular Gulf, Hijazi, Najdi, and Yemeni. So we have the writing system: Arabic alphabet, Arabic Braille, and Arabizi. So that's it. And now let's move to the culture. So in culture, let's start from this their religious beliefs. So Arab culture and the Islamic faith are deeply intertwined. While Islam is the predominant religion, and other religious groups are accepted and treated with respect. Most Arabs believe that most of life's events are controlled and orchestrated by God. So man is dependent on the faith as determined by God and is powerless in controlling many of life's events. As a result, religious affiliation is essential to everyone in the Arab society, okay? So most Arabs believe there should be no separation between church and the state, and the religion should be taught to children in school. While there are multiple sects of Islam, the Islamic law, or Sharia, is as important as any other type of law. According to Islam, so piety is the most admirable characteristic someone can have. And then we have their family. So their family is important also. So besides their faith, family is the second most important element to Arabs. Family loyalty and obligations take precedence over loyalty and obligations to friends or a job and over one's personal needs. So their family is also important to them. So children are considered as jewels, and the men that men and women, as well as male and female children, have different and distinct roles. So therefore, the family structure is tight-knit and is one of the major determining factors of personal status, followed by individual character and achievement. So a person's honor and dignity come from their family. Okay. So traditional dress in Arab. So we have the thawb or thawb. So also spelled thobi or thob or tobi, and known by various other names in different regions, is an ankle-length robe usually with long sleeves. It is commonly worn in the Arabian Peninsula and the Middle East, neighboring Arab countries, and some countries in East and West Africa. And izar is typically worn underneath. So that is an example. So we also have here the abaya, meaning cloth in Arabic. Abaya is a piece of loose overgarments that worn in the Arabian Peninsula, North Africa, and the Middle East. So the garment resembles a wide robe and is meant to cover up the body of a wearer and protect it from sight. Okay, so in the Islamic world, abaya is worn by men and women alike. Okay, so most women wear a hijab. So hijab, and some sport a jilbab, or even an abaya and niqab, while some older men can still be seen with kifaya. And all Tunics traditional clothes were once famous for the quality of their fabrics and their embroideries, so often in black and red. So many people unfamiliar with the Arab culture think that hijab and abaya are the only traditional Arabic garments women wear. So, in contrary to popular opinion, different Arab nations and different regions have their own preferred dress and headscarf types. So those are for the cultures, traditions, and the beliefs, and the families and dresses. So now, let's move to the food of the Arabs. So it is a madfun, chicken mandi, chicken shawarma, hummus and meat, pita bread, chicken makbous, and mansaf. So the traditional way of cooking Arabic foods are totally different from other countries. So most of the Arab foods has lots of calories with rich nutritions. So just like what I have said, the meat makfun, madfun, chicken makbous, chicken mandi, luk kamimat, balalit, nikwase la salad, harwis, hummus and meat, pita bread with falafel, hummus, chicken shawarma, and then mansaf. Okay, so here is the everyday Arabic traditions. So it is not polite to say no. So the term as God wills it is a nicer way to say no. It is always best to say yes. Keep in mind that a yes can also mean maybe. So never openly refuse a request from a friend. If someone does a favor for you, return the favor in some way. So Arabs are generally very socially oriented people. People who are relaxed and are reasonable or personable enough to establish relationships tend to be more successful. Okay, so in hospitality and visits. So hospitality, friendliness, and generosity to strangers is an expression of sacred duties. So when sitting, avoid stretching legs in front of or sitting up higher than others. So don't lean against walls, slouch in chairs, or put hands in your pockets. And double meanings are common in conversations. Do not talk loudly. The meal is usually at the conclusion to an event. Middle Easterners are considered it impolite to eat everything on one's plate. So yeah, take off your shoes at the entrance and leave them there before going in. Okay, so now let's move in for the Arabic language facts. So these are the interesting Arabic language facts. If you are thinking about learning a language, it's always good to know a little about the origins and the history of the language that we are learning. Here, the Cactus language offers up our most interesting Arabic language facts. So, Arabic is a Semitic language. Okay, so the Arabic language originates from the Arabian Peninsula. As the Muslim world expanded, Arabic spread into North Africa and Western Asia. Okay, so there are around 280 million Arabic native speakers worldwide. Arabic is an official language in 26 countries, including Algeria, Egypt, Israel, along with Hebrew, so Lebanon, Morocco, Saudi Arabia, Tunisia, and UAE, making it the fifth most spoken language in the world. Okay, so Arabic has influenced a great number of languages. So Arabic has influenced a great numbers of languages, okay? So do not forget that, including most European languages as well as Asian and African languages. So English has many Arabic loanwords such as alcohol, algebra, algorithm, average, candy, caravan, cotton, giraffe, guitar, jar, lemon, lilac, magazine, sugar, and so on. So there are around 14 words that describe love. Do you know that? Each word for love, so for them, describes specific stages of falling in love. For example, Hawa describes the initial attraction towards someone. And then they referred as huyum, the loss of reason that follows, and ishq, a blind desire. Okay, so Arabic and Hebrew share distinctive features, and Arabic and Hebrew are both Semitic language. And their similarities make it easier for Arabic speakers to learn Hebrew and vice versa. Okay, so Arabic has no capital letters. Okay, we must know that the Arabic alphabet uses quotation marks for emphasis instead of capital letters. Okay, so Arabic has sounds that don't exist in other languages. How is that? So some non-native speakers find it difficult to pronounce words in Arabic due to the sum of the sounds being uncommon in other widely spoken languages. So for instance, okay, so you can see that as H, sound that is only found in Arabic. So Arabic words are written from right to left. Unlike many other widely used language, Arabic words are written from right to left, and Arabic numbers are written from left to right. Other elements of Arab culture, including the veneration of the desert and the nomad's life, were integrated with many local traditions. Arabs of today, however, are not exclusively Muslim. Okay, so approximately, according to our survey, 5% of the native speakers of Arabic worldwide are Christians, Druzes, Jews, or animists. Traditional Arab values were modified in the 20th century by the pressures of urbanization, industrialization, detribalization, and Western influence. Nearly half of the Muslims Arabs live in cities and towns where family and tribal ties tend to break down and where women as well as men have greater educational and employment and opportunity, and where the newly emerging middle class of technicians, professionals, and bureaucrats has gained influence. So that's it.
Arabian famous authors and their contribution in classic time. Imru al-Qais is the heir of the throne of Kendra tribe, which was based in the Arabian Peninsula. Al-Qais chose a life of traveling, drinking, fighting, and poetry. His masterpiece is the Al-Mu'allaga, an ode so revered that it is written in gold on sheet of paper which are then hung on the walls of Kaaba in Mecca. Islam's most revered shrine, it is translated as Hang Od. Al-Qais is considered by many to be superior because of his astonishing metaphor and beautiful verses which echo his desire to be a worthy lover, wise man, warrior, and a master. Tamadir bint Amir, better known as Al-Kansa, is one of the Arabs' famous female poets converting into Islam during the lifetime of Prophet Muhammad. Her masterpiece is her eulogies to her brother Shakar. His brother Shakar is a tribal chief who was severely wounded and later died after a raid against the rival Bani Asad tribe. Abu Nuwas. Abu Nuwas was born in Avas in modern-day Iran. He moved at a young age to Iraq, the governing seat of then mighty Abbasid Caliphate. His work is punchy, spontaneous, and full of sharp twists as he vocally celebrated pleasure, male lover, wine, music, and good company while despising war and the clash of swords. The reputation of Abu Nuwas in Arab world is built on his adoration of wine and as a poet of gay love. Al-Mutanabi, born in Kufa, Iraq as Ahmed bin Ahusin al-Kindi. Name translates as he who would be a prophet. Through his near 300 poems, he mastered Arabic verses like no other, and treated poetry as a craft to be studied and thought. Of wisdom, pride, courage, fighting the Romans, and worshipping one's ego. The life of Al-Mutanabi is perhaps best described as an epic journey to glory, money, and power. He never rested in place, traveling to places after places, earning income from emirs of his poetic praise for them. One of his masterpieces is the recapture of the fortress of Al-Haddad. The fortress of Al-Hadat is about a victory of a prince of Aleppo, Saif al-Dawla I-Harndani, over a Byzantine army, a feat that led to reconquest of the Al-Hadat fortress. Arabian famous author and their works in modern time. Muhammad Darwish was born in Palestinian village of Al-Birwa under a British mandate, but fled as the Israeli authorities took over and displaced thousands of Arabs. In much of his work, he mixed modern poetry with Arabic rhythmical meters. Subjects includes the Palestinian Revolution of 1965 to 1993 and the mass exodus of 1948. The known as catastrophe or Nakba. The excerpt showcased Darwish's childhood memory from his family's eviction in 1948, or the experience of Palestinian dispossession exile more generally. Next is Iman Mersal. Iman Mersal's poems delve into personal and banal, but then morph into metaphor about life, travel, and motherhood. She writes free prose, a style of poetry which is not metered by Arabic rhythm. These Are Not Oranges, My Love. A selection of her work was published in 2008. The excerpt of These Are Not Oranges, My Love tackles about how love exists against itself, how human heart is often conflicted with its own nature, how imperfection state survives imperfection. In other words, overthinking ruins a natural or normal state of mind. On the other hand, overthinking makes us strive hard to reach the better self which resembles joy. Next is Nuri al-Jara, who is a Syrian by birth, known for his use of free prose, collating a chorus of voices inspired by mythology, folktales, and ancient Greek theater protagonists. He is currently the editor of Al-Jadid Culture magazine, dividing his time between London and Abu Dhabi. Recent work translated into English include About to Lisbus. The excerpt of About to Lisbus talks about the experience of Syrian refugees forced to flee their destroyed country, enduring frightening journey across the Mediterranean before arriving the small island that serves as their refuge.
Good afternoon, everyone. I will be your third reporter for this discussion. My name is Vanessa Ansumalinog, and I will be discussing about the Arabian literature. So the first thing that will come into our mind when we say about literature, it is embodied with writings. So the question is, how was Arabic literature developed? The first significant Arabic literature was produced during the medieval golden age of lyric poetry. From the 4th to the 7th century, the poems are already personal qasida or odes, often very short with some longer than 100 lines. They treat the life of the tribe and themes of life, love, fighting, courage, and the chase. Therefore, Arabic literature is the writing of both a prose and a poetry, produced by writers in the Arabic language. So the Arabic word used for the literature is adab. When we say adab, which is derived from a meaning of etiquette, and which implies politeness, culture, and enrichment. Arabic literature emerged in the 5th century with only fragments of the written language appearing before then. The Quran, widely regarded as the finest piece of literature in Arabic language, so their masterpiece or their finest piece was really Quran. In Christianity, we call it Bible. So would it have the greatest lasting effect on the Arabic culture and its literature. Arabic literature flourished during the Islamic Golden Age but has remained vibrant to the present day, with the poets and prose writers across the Arab world as well as in the diaspora achieving increasing success. So who is the father of Arabic literature? 3 generations of poets applied a diversity of these elements in their art. Notable pioneers of their first classical phase include Imru al-Qais bin Hur al-Kindi, oftentimes considered as the father of Arabic poetry, Al-Muhalhil Adi ibn Rabia, Tarafa ibn al-Ab, and Kab ibn Zuhair. So we will going to discuss now about the history of Arabic literature. The first part of the history was all about Jahili. Jahili literature is the literature of pre-Islamic period. So this is the time of their pre-Islamic period, referred to as Jahiliya, or the time of ignorance, so meaning wala pa masyadong alam. And in pre-Islamic Arabia, markets such as Souk Ukaz, in the addition of Souk Mahana and Souk Di Al-Mahaz, were destinations of caravans from throughout the peninsula. At these markets, poetry was recited, and the dialect of the Qurashi, the tribe is control of Souk Ukaz of Mecca, became predominant. So, back in the history, poetry is one of their piece. Next, the Quran is also part of the history. So the Quran is one of the most influential examples, as what I've said earlier. It is their finest piece. Examples of Arabic literature. The Quran is the main holy book of Islam, had a significant influence on the Arabic language, and marked the beginning of Islamic literature. So, Muslims believe that it was transcribed in the Arabic dialect of the Quraysh, the tribe of Muhammad, as an Islam spread. The Quran had the effect of unifying and standardizing Arabic. The next part is the Rashidi under the Rashidun, or the we called it rightly guided caliphs. So literary centers developed in Hijaz, in cities such as Mecca and Medina, in the Levant, in Damascus, and in Iraq, in Kufa and Basra. Literary production and poetry in particular in this period served the spread of Islam. The next is the Umayyad, the first fitna, which is created the Shia. Sunni split over the rightful caliph had a great impact on Arabic literature, whereas literature along with the Arab society was greatly centralized in the time of Muhammad and the Rashidun. It became fractured at the beginning of the period of Umayyad Caliphate as the power struggles led to tribalism. So when we talk about tribalism in Umayyad, tribalism is a state of being organized by or advocating the tribes or tribal lifestyles. So the Umayyad were tends to had a tribalism, which is the tribe was being organized or advocate by tribal lifestyles. Human evolution has primarily occurred in small hunter-gatherer groups, as opposed to in a larger and more recently settled agricultural societies or civilization. So that is tribalism. So the next part is the Abbasid, an illustration of the House of Wisdom by Yahya ibn Ibn Mahmud al-Wasiti in a manuscript of Makama of al-Hariri. The Abbasid period is generally recognized as the beginning of the Islamic Golden Age and was a time of significant literary production. The House of Wisdom in Baghdad hosted numerous scholars and writers such as Al-Jahiz and Omar Khayyam. The next one is the Andalusi. An Andalusi literature was produced by Al-Andalus, or the Islamic Iberia, from its Muslim conquest in 711 to either the Catholic conquest of Granada in 1492 or the expulsion of the Moors ending. The last one, probably not the last one, but the last part of this history of Arabic literature was the Nada. During the 19th century, a revival took place in Arabic literature along with much Arabic culture, and is referred to in Arabic or the Al-Nada, which means the Renaissance. This surgence of new writings in Arabic was confined mainly in Syria, Egypt, and Lebanon until 20th century, when it spread to other countries in the region. This cultural renaissance was not only felt within the Arab world, but also beyond, with a growing interest in translating Arabic words into European language. So the Arabic literature begins to conquer the world, especially in European countries. Now let's move on to the modern literature. So throughout the 20th century, Arabic writers in both poetry, prose, and theater plays have reflecting the changing of political and social climate of the Arab world. So the anti-colonial themes were prominent early in the 20th century, with writers continuing to explore the region's relationship with the West. So internal political upheaval has also been a challenge, with writers suffering censorship or persecution. What do we mean by censorship? So when we say censorship, it is the suppression of speech, public communication, or other information. This may be done on the basis that such material is considered objectionable, harmful, sensitive, or inconvenient. So censorship can be conducted by governments, private institutions, and other controlling bodies. On the other hand, when we say persecution, it is the act or the practice of persecuting, especially those who differ in origin, religion, or the social outlook. So that is the meaning of persecution, as together with the censorship. So who is this pioneer of modern Arabic literature? It is writer Quastaki al-Himsi. So, Alpine writer Quastaki al-Himsi of 1958 to 1941 is credited with having founded modern Arabic literary criticisms with one of his works, The Researcher's Source in the Science of Criticism. So he is the pioneer of modern Arabic literature, Quastaki al-Himsi. Next, the poetry during modern literature. So the poetry during modern literature is poetry retains very important status in the Arab world. So as what I said earlier, poetry began at history and continuing to evolve and grow during modern literature. So Mahmud Darwish was regarded as the Palestinian national poet, and his funeral was attended by thousands of mourners. Syrian poet Nizar Kobani addressed less political themes but was regarded as an cultural icon, and his poems provided the lyrics for many popular songs. So these are some famous writers that made a piece of poetry piece during modern literature. So the novel during modern literature was two distinct trends can be found in the Nada period of revival. The first was the neoclassical movement, which sought to rediscover the literary traditions of the past and influenced by traditional literary genres such as Makama and works like 1001 Nights. In contrast, modernist movement began by translating Western modernist work, primarily novels, into Arabic. So the next one was the plays. Also has a role during the modern literature. Plays, the musical plays of Lebanese Maroon Nakachi or Nakach from the mid 1880s are considered the birth of not only theater in Lebanon but also in modern Arab theater. Modern Arabic drama began to be written in the 19th century, chiefly in Egypt, and mainly influenced in the imitation of the French work. So from the Arabian countries to Egypt and to French. It was not until the 20th century that it began to develop a distinctly Arab flavor and has been seen elsewhere. So it was growing. The most important Arab playwright writing was Tawfiq al-Hakim, whose first was a retelling the Quranic story of the Seven Sleepers, and the second an epilogue of 1001 Nights. Other important dramatics of the region include Yusuf al-Ani from Iraq and Sa'adallah Wanus from Syria. Now let's move on to Arabic literature. So it is same. The poetry is still here. A large portion of Arabic literature before 20th century is a form of poetry. From the history to the modern and to the classical, the poetry remains, and even prose from this period is either filled with snipers of poetry or in the form of saj or rhymed prose. The themes of the poetry range from the high-flown hymns of praise to bitter personal attacks, and from religious and mystical ideas to poems on women and wine. An important feature of the poetry which would be applied to the literature was the idea that it must be pleasing to eat. The poetry and much of the prose was written with the design that it would be spoken aloud, and great care was taken to make all the writings mellifluous as possible. So as the time goes by, as the literature growing, the strategies or the ways of writing a poetry was also changing. And the culinary is also a part of the classical literature. More medieval cookbooks have survived into the present day, written in Arabic than in any other language. Classical Arabic culinary literature is comprised not only with the cookbooks. There are also many works of scholarships and descriptions of contemporary foods can be found in fictional and legendary tales like the 1001 Nights. Some of these texts predate Ibn Sayyar al-Warakitab al-Taqib, the earliest known book of medieval Arabic cuisine. So the Persian language, Khusrau, Udikawi. Translated into Arabic after the conquest of Sasanian Empire of Arab armies in the 7th century, was a guide to sophisticated culinary and culture of time, written as a fictionalized narrative about an orphan descended from priestly roots who learns the ways of Khosrow is court. So, as what you have observed in Arabic literature, it was focusing on two pieces, which is the poetry and the prose from the history to the modern literature to the classical Arabic literature. It was only been added about culinary, the plays and the novels. So they are more focused on the pieces of poetry and the prose. So why is it that Arabic literature is important for us non-Arabic to learn about them? So it is the source of many ideas from them, so that we can learn something that was part of their literatures. The allusions, the quotes, and the moral message informs many works. So it is important for any one of us to discover not just our literature but others' literature as well, for us to be more educated and for to be as more creative of choosing or making our own piece aside from Quran, the hadith or tradition of what Muhammad is supposed to have said and done are important in literature. So that's all for Arabic literature. I hope you gain or you learn something about my discussion for today. So again, I am Vanessa Ansumalinog, and now for the next reporter, I am giving the floor to Miss Christine Grace Orot. Thank you everyone for listening again.
So good day everyone, I am Stephanie Elvira Hermosa and I am going to report about prose and poetry in Arabic. So first we will discuss about Arabic prose. So Arabic prose, such or rhyme prose, is the most striking characteristic feature of Arabic prose and consists of succession of pairs of short rhyming expression with rhetorical and antithetical balance of sense between the pairs of expression, with a certain loose of rhythmical balance not bound by strict meter. So the khutbah or formal litany is rhyme prose style. It is a great antiquity. So one of the religious verses in the earliest time of Islam. So the most famous is Ibn Nabata at Faridi. Arabic prose began in the later days of Umayyad Empire. It exhibits use of the khutbah style and most sophisticated and fluent style derived from the literary traditions of Sasanian Persian. So the most celebrated work of Ibn Mukafa is Kila Wadimna. So it's translation from the Pahlavi version of Indian fable Pakantara. So next is Arabic poetry. So there is much more evidence of written literature among the Arabs before the Islamic period. So oral traditions, the poetry of North Arabs, particularly the Bedouin tribes of the 5th and 6th centuries, are the most outstanding in artistry and sensuousness of feelings. So poetry was constructed in elaborate meters, of which 16 are universally recognized. So all verses are divided into two types, and they are the occasional poems, collections, or anthologies. So first, we will discuss occasional poems. So it is consisting of 2 to 20 lines whose themes are usually war and revenge and praise of one's own tribe. So various genres fall to this are elegies, praising the dead. The most famous type was kansa. The odds are considered was an elaborate ode usually of 60 to 100 lines. Themes were usually about exploits of a narrator, his old passion, and description of camp life in honor of his patron. The oral transmission of poems lasted for 350 years. So, second is collection or anthologies. So, Mu'algat, a group of pre-Islamic cults. So, there are three kinds of collection that belongs to this topic. So, first is Al-Mu'alkat, means suspended, because these poems were supposed to have been displayed by the Arabs on the Kaaba at Mecca. These collections are ascribed to Hamid al-Rawisha in 18th century AD by Amru Uy Qais. Most illustrious of our Arabian poets show the nomadic life, views, and philosophies, visions, and their dreams arising from such conditions. The second is Al-Hamasan. It's an anthropology compiled by poets Taman about 836 AD. Derived its name from the beginning of books and poems. Themes were usually about valor and constant battles, patience when confronted reality, seeking vengeance, pagan rituals, myths, temptations, treasures, and Arab traditions. So last is Mujadiyat. It's a collection of poems named after Mufadali bin Yalla, so who compiled them for the future Caliph Mahdi between 762 and 784. Showed hospitality, charity, valor, faithfulness, lavish entertainment, love for wine, and love for chance. So in the first century after the death of Muhammad in 622 AD, called Umayyad period, there were no outstanding literary productions, but there were four noteworthy poets. And they are: first is Akhatal, second, Farazdak, third, Jarir, fourth is Durma. The Qasidas, a type of literature, was becoming stereotyped, but the vogue of court poetry became popular. So next is Abbasid period, lasts for 750 to 1258. So new tendencies were favored and Arabic poetry became popular. So the classical tradition kept faith with the past, particularly desert poetry, with one modification: the substitution for the old imaginative phrases of the rhetoric types, a passion set by Muslim Ibn Waqdi, followed by Taman, and extravagantly exploited by Mutanabi. Some critics often call this period as the Golden Age, up to 1055 AD, and 1258 as the Silver Age. Poets become more original in their crafts, influenced by Hellenistic and Persian arts. So outstanding authors are Ibn Ishaq, the author of Muhammad's life, Rabja of Basra and Sufi poetess, Abu Nuwas, greatest Arab lyricist. Sorry, correct me if I'm wrong sa mga pronunciation po. So next is classical poets. So this classical poet is by so this poem is work of Abu al-Ala al-Mari in this author is from 973 to 1057 AD. So Abdul have his most famous work, which is the two epigrams about death and beliefs, and this is but this one was already translated by Gert Jan van Gelder from classical Arabic literature. So next is in the modern poets, we have Maram al-Mashri in 1962 to present. So this is one of her work. This one is translated by Khalid Matawa from A Red Cherry on a White Tide Floor. So I just give you two examples of poetry in Arabic because Hannah Tilarma have already give you some of those. So thank you for listening. Goodbye.
A very pleasant day, everyone. I am Christine Grace S. Urot, and I will be telling you about the frame of the Arabian Nights. So first up, what is the Arabian Nights? 1001 Nights, or more commonly known as the Arabian Nights. It is a collection of Middle Eastern folk tales compiled in Arabic during the Islamic Golden Age. So the work was collected for over many centuries by various authors, translators, scholars across West, Central, and South Asia, and also North Africa. So some tales trace their roots back to ancient medieval Arabic, Egyptian, Indian, Persian, and Mesopotamian folklore and literature. So now I will be giving you a synopsis of the Arabian Nights. So after his first wife betrays him, King Shahriyar is highly convinced that all women are traitors. So as a revenge, he marries a new bride each night and kills them all at daybreak. So this went on until his vizier's well-read elder daughter Shahrazad decided to save the people by marrying the king. So it appears that she sacrificed herself, and telling him fascinating stories every night. By this means, she hopes to delay their execution indefinitely. So the idea of Shahrazad is that she will tell the king fascinating stories, but she will not tell the ending of the story. So naga-extend ang iyang execution kay the king finds the stories fascinating, and dili urag the king wants to know about the ending of the story, but Shahrazad does not tell the ending of the story, therefore magsige kadili ang iyang execution. And that is the overall synopsis of the Arabian Nights. Now onto the main topic of my report. Why is Arabian Nights considered as a frame story? First up, what is a frame story? A frame story is a narrative that frames or surrounds another story or set of stories. It usually appears at the beginning and end of that larger story and provides important context and key information for how to read it. So, frame story is like it is a story within another story. So onto the I will be now telling you the reason why Arabian Nights is considered as a frame story. So the synopsis that I have given earlier, it was actually considered as a prologue. Prologue lang siya, not the synopsis in overall. Because the real focus of the Arabian Nights was the tales that Shahrazad told to the king. It's like, if we put this into other meaning, Arabian Nights is a compilation of tales. So bale, ang katong mga tales nga ginatel ni Shahrazad sa king, those were the collection of tales that Arabian Nights was giving focus to. So Arabian Nights is a compilation of tales, rather not a one long story. So that is already the exact definition why Arabian Nights is a frame story. The story of Shahrazad and the king, it is only the frame that holds the overall focus of the story, which was the collection of tales. And katong collection of tales nga ginaput focus sa Arabian Nights, gidisguise to siya as the tales nga gina recite or gina story ni Shahrazad sa king. So it's like story within another story. So, the story of the King Shahriyar, who marries and kills his bride every morning, and the daughter of the Vizier Shahrazad is the frame story. So, muna to siya, ang story ni Shahrazad o the King Shahriyar, mo to siya ang frame nga nag-hold sa overall focus of the Arabian Nights, which is the compilation of tales. So, the real focus of the it was only disguised as the story that Shahrazad tells to the king every night. So, if as a repetition or a conclusion of my report, Arabian Nights is considered to be a frame story because it is a story within another story. The frame story, the frame part of the Arabian Nights was the story of Shahrazad and the king. Then, ang focus mismo sa Arabian Nights, kay diba Arabian Nights is a compilation of tales. So, katong compilation of tales, gidisguise to siya as ang mga story or tales nga ginatel ni Shahrazad sa king. So, it's like a story within another story. So, that concludes my report into why Arabian Nights is considered to be a frame story. And that is all I hope you learned from my report. Thank you.